Hi, I'm Daniel Zwerdling.
And I'm David Shipler. Two reporters start now.
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Danny. How you doing?
Great, thanks. And here's our mission today. Our guest is going to tell us how she's studying the sounds that whales make. And she'll tell us how she's figuring out what they mean. But first, listen to this recording our guest made of a humpback whale.
Our guest today is Michelle Fournet. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, you're an assistant professor in what's called marine bioacoustics. And I have to say, you're widely considered to be an important researcher, one of the best in this world of recording the sounds that sea creatures make and trying to figure out what they mean. Can you tell us what we were just listening to?
Yeah, that recording is a large group of humpback whales that were foraging, eating up in Southeast Alaska. And the sounds that you're hearing are called social calls. And these are the sounds of everyday life for a whale that might be spending time while it's having breakfast.
And do you know yet, I know that people around the world, including you, have been studying this for years. Do you know yet what those sounds mean that we just listened to?
Oh, not really. It's one of those things where I think that we've had about a generation of researchers who have been listening to humpback whale calling behavior, and a generation isn't yet enough time for us to have figured out exactly why the whales are making the sounds that they're making. But we're getting closer. We're making some progress.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about how closer you're getting and what your hunches are, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, there's really only, we'll say, two sounds that humpback whales make. Well, aside from song. When people think of humpback whales, they typically think of singing. So your mind might conjure up the image of the golden record that we sent out into outer space that had the recording of whale song on it. Or if you're a little older than me, you might have had the record that Roger and Katie Payne recorded, Song of the Humpback Whale.
In 1970, yes.
Yeah. And it sounds like...
Wow, that's great. And just for comparison, here's a recording of an actual whale that the Paynes made. We've trimmed it for time.
And it's this really lovely, rhythmic, patterned sound. I want you to forget all of that. The other side of humpback whale communication is calling behavior. It's what most whales say most of the time. And so these two things stand in a pretty sharp dichotomy to one another because male whales sing, but only male whales. And we think it's really only mature male whales that sing, which means that it's only a portion of the population, a portion of the time, that's producing this really iconic sound. The sound that as humans we identify with being the voice of this species. What I am interested in is what the actual voice of the entire species is, not just male whales during the breeding season, but male whales, female whales, baby whales, geriatric whales.
Huh.
What do whales say when they're not just in the act of working towards reproduction? And that's all of these little blobby, short, eccentric, disorganized sounds that we heard in some of these recordings.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so these little blobby sounds, they're really hard to study. And there's really only two sounds that we have any strong hypotheses for what they're for. And one of them, we are very, very confident that it's a feeding call. And the other one, we are getting more and more confident that it's a contact call. So that was a very long-winded answer to a very simple question.
No, that was good. And we're going to get into those details in a moment. But first, I guess, Dave, want to give Michelle a proper introduction?
Yeah, we've been neglectful here.
We should be better hosts.
So actually, we're lucky that we're able to work out a time to chat with you because you go far off into the wilderness to record what whales and also bearded seals are saying or calling. And you just came back from a research trip, so we'd like to hear about that later and understand the techniques that you use. But you are, Michelle Fournet, the head of, if I'm getting this right, the Marine Bioacoustics and Behavior Lab at the University of New Hampshire, which has this wonderful acronym, BABBLE.
It was a genius who made that up. Did you make that up?
Yeah.
I want to add something because I just kind of realized it in reading and so forth, is that we don't often think of sounds under the sea, but the sea is pretty dark when it gets deep. So sounds are often the way of communication, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. As visual creatures, we interpret the world through sight. So light and dark is really important to us. And so we think of the ocean as sort of a dark, unknown place. But if you take a minute to reframe your perception of the world to that of an animal that lives underwater, the sensory experience of being underwater is extremely vibrant because sound travels for miles. The largest whales in the ocean, blue whales, can communicate for hundreds, potentially thousands of kilometers. But even some of the...
Wait. Excuse me. You mean their vocalizations travel hundreds, even thousands of kilometers?
Yeah. There is evidence that a blue whale in the southern hemisphere could be detected by a blue whale in the northern hemisphere. I mean, across ocean basins, all the way around the world.
That's wild.
So the underwater is a virtual symphony of animals communicating with one another. And
so not just whales are communicating by sound, other sea creatures as well?
Yeah. In fact, almost every organism that lives underwater relies on sound for something.
Really?
So they're not all sound producing, but almost all marine organisms are sound receiving. So this means that even some of the tiniest organisms, larval plankton, coral polyps, listen for cues of their environment to know where to settle. So an oyster that's trying to build an oyster reef might listen for the sound of the right snap, crackle, pop, for the right way that the wave hits against a substrate, and it uses that as a cue to know this is where I'm going to sit down and make my life.
Wow, amazing.
And oyster researchers, like the oyster equivalent of Michelle Fournet, have figured that out?
Yeah. In fact, I just got a grant to do work on this with mussels. So when you study sound in something underwater, it all links together. And the next thing you know, you've been studying whales for 15 years and somebody says, hey, would you like to study invertebrates? And inevitably the answer is like, yeah, let's give it a go. Let's see how this works.
Well, before we get into the details of your work with whales and now mussels and bearded seals and others, let's take a step back. You mentioned the songs of the humpback whale back in 1970. And this, I take it, was kind of the beginning of the modern age of researching whale sounds, right? Because, hundreds of years ago, mariners claimed they heard whales singing or something. But give us a little history, please, starting maybe around 1970 and Roger Payne and his wife.
Yeah, so it was revolutionary from a scientific perspective and I think also from a social perspective. Roger and Katie Payne, what a power couple at the time. Roger was an engineer and an acoustician, and Katie was a musician. And they were in Bermuda, and they met with a man named Frank Watlington, who worked for the Navy. And Katie is a friend, and she's told me this story. They spent the whole day with Frank, and at the end of the day, he was a kind of quiet fellow. He said, I'd like to play something for you. And he pulled out these tapes, and for years he had been recording voices of these whales. And it was one of the first times that anyone had ever really documented the sounds of these animals. And he turned those tapes over to Roger and Katie, who then began to analyze them. And that became a lifelong devotion to trying to document and share the voices of these whales. And then they made an album that came out in 1970. And then Humpback Whale Song became, in a lot of ways, the voice of the ocean itself.
Famous musicians back then in 1970 and the early 70s when the album came out started doing their own music. Here's a little bit of Judy Collins.
And the dear land of Crimond, I bid you farewell. I'm bound on.
So what was it about those recordings that kind of sparked, energized this whole new field of research? What are whales saying?
I think there was two things. The first is that we heard something of ourselves in those recordings. Because whale song is structured, and in a lot of ways it's structured the same way that human song is structured. There are phrases, there's repetition, there's rhythm. And I think when humans find a kinship with something, it becomes important to them. But I also think that over millennial time, humans have had a fascination with whales. I mean, going back to the Irish saint, Saint Brendan, who's the patron saint of whales, who had Easter lunch on the back of a floating whale. Or I think the whale's name was Porphyris, which translates directly to purple, which was a whale off the coast of Greece and Rome that emperors and soldiers used to watch. Or if you look at some of the earliest cave drawings in the Arctic, they're drawings of whales.
Wow.
And of hunters that have gone out over thousands of years, the entire basis of their civilization was linked to the nutrition and the body of these animals. The entire Industrial Revolution started on the body of whales. But when we started to listen, that just upended how we viewed what we used to think of as a resource, and now we think of as an animal, or in some cases as a friend or an individual. We build relationships with these whales. And that was a powerful and pivotal tipping point for how people view environmental conservation when we gave the ocean a voice. And sometimes I think the human race does a lot of talking and not quite as much listening.
Oh boy, that's for sure. Listening. And you became a listener early on. What's your story? I mean, are you musical?
Yeah. I come from a really interesting household. One of the hallmarks of what it meant to be a part of our family was to be a creative person. My stepfather was a pianist, and I was a kind of cheeky child, and I wanted to learn how to play the piano, and I asked my stepfather to play the piano, and I expected that we were going to sit down and he was going to teach me how to read music and tell me about rhythm, and I'd be playing scales by the end of the day. And that's just not at all how he sat down to teach me how to play the piano. Instead, he had me sit down at the piano and play one note and close my eyes and listen. And he had me hold down that note until the sound of the piano naturally stopped. And we did that with every note on the piano. And I never learned to play the piano. I never learned to read music, but I did learn, I think, starting then how to be a good listener. And I stayed a musical person for a long time. I became a singer and I became a writer. And
So how did you stumble into whale research?
I stumbled into whale research because I was broke. Not that there's a lot of money in whale research. There's not. It's not, no one's going to pay you the big bucks to study whales. I was living in Chicago and I was trying to make it in the theater, and I was dead broke. I mean, I was stealing internet from my downstairs neighbor. Thank you, anonymous downstairs neighbor from my 20s. And I saw a job posting on online that said, work on whale watching boats in Alaska. And I thought that sounded like an adventure. And so I packed up. My dog and I moved to Alaska, and we bought a car for $500. And I started to work on whale watching boats.
Tour boats.
Yeah, I became a whale watching naturalist, and I spent every day on the water watching these animals. I had never seen a whale when I got that job. And I would give tours and I'd tell people all about the whales, and I read a bunch of books so that I could learn how to talk to these tourists that came to Alaska. And every day we'd go out on these boats and we'd go and we'd see the same whales over and over. I got to know them really well. Some of them are still there.
You can tell them often by their flukes, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the underside of the whale's tail, the fluke, is like a fingerprint. And the same whales will go back to the same regions year after year after year. And so you can get to know the individuals and some of their habits really, really well. And the boats that we were on were loud, and occasionally we would drop a hydrophone in the water, and if the boat was on, you could hear nothing other than boats. And so I started to feel really guilty that I was participating and having so much noise in the water and kind of chasing these animals around, and yet I wasn't using any of those resources to help the whales themselves. So I started volunteering my time for different researchers in the area, and then ultimately went back to graduate school and started studying the impact of noise on humpback whales, which led me very much into studying communication. And that's kind of where I landed, was how do whales communicate and what might they be saying to each other, and how are we changing that? How has their whole system of communication shifted in order to compensate for human activities?
So how do you go about this? I mean, what do you do technically to listen to whales?
So I just got back from Glacier Bay, Alaska. I was in Glacier Bay just a few days ago. And if you want to understand what an animal is doing and it's under the water, you have two choices. You can put a hydrophone down and listen for it and hope that that gives you enough information.
That's a microphone, right?
Yeah, it's like an underwater microphone. Or you can sit up at the surface of the water and watch the whale come up and then wait and then watch the whale come up again and see if you can figure it out. I try and put those two things together. So I try and take observations that I make of the whale above the water and couple them with recordings that I make below the water. So recently in Glacier Bay, we would go out and we would pick an area where whales had been sighted recently, and we would stop our boat, turn all the engines off, and drop a hydrophone in the water, and we were listening in real time. Put on headphones, and we've got hydrophones hanging over the side of the boat. And then standing on the boat, you look out and you figure out how many whales are there. What are the whales doing when they're making these sounds? And start to link up the observations between what you see and what you hear. The alternative to that is we'll put down long-term hydrophones, and we'll do something called passive acoustic monitoring, where we have hydrophones that will listen for 6 months.
6 months.
Or a year.
And are these floating attached to a buoy of some sort? Something like that?
No, they're on the ocean floor. We sink them straight down to the bottom. And while they're down there, they're just recording. And then we'll come back 6 months later or a year later and pick them up.
And how deep are they on the ocean floor?
The ones that I have in Glacier Bay are fairly shallow. They're only at about 60 feet. But I've had hydrophones down as deep as 1,000 feet.
Wow. But how do you get it back?
Oh, that's a good question. There's an instrument called an acoustic release. And when you put a speaker in the water and you play exactly the right sound, this acoustic release will respond to that sound by unscrewing a little nut at the bottom of the instrument. And it's attached to a buoy and it floats to the surface.
Oh, my God.
And then I haul the whole thing up. And that also means that we leave nothing behind. So there's no trash on the ocean floor. The only footprint that the hydrophone was ever there is an indentation in the sand that within a matter of moments can get washed away by the currents. So it's a very, very low impact form of science.
You mentioned earlier that there were two basic kinds of calls that you were interested in, feeding call and contact call. Mm-hmm. And what have you been finding? What have you been hearing from all of these recordings?
One of the biggest things that I like to hit home on when we talk about humpback whale vocalizations is that most of what they're saying is subtle. And most sounds you hear in the ocean are quite subtle. And I think lots of biologists are really interested in studying the extraordinary and studying the flashiest things. I'm really interested in the ordinary. I'm really interested in what whales do and what whales say when everything is going well. And so there's this little nondescript call called a whoop call. It sounds like... And that sound is the most commonly produced humpback whale sound on the planet. It's produced by male whales, female whales, baby whales, old whales. Every population of whales in which we have dropped a hydrophone and listened, we have found that call.
Can you do that again, Michelle? I love it.
This is the singer that Michelle used to be. Still is.
Yeah. It sounds like...
A little pop at the end.
Yeah, and it's a fairly stereotyped call, but they're all a little bit different. So some of them will sound like... And others will go... And they all have that upsweep at the end.
And just for comparison, here's a recording Michelle did of a real humpback whale. We're going to repeat it a couple times.
And this call was common enough that we got really curious about what it was for. With an animal like a humpback whale that is so vocally plastic, it can produce an almost infinite combination of sounds. If you could produce an infinite combination of sounds, why would you make this one over and over and over again?
You mean forget songs for a moment. You wanted to know, why do humpbacks keep making the same basic calls?
Yeah. And the answer has to be that it serves some really important function. Because in addition to it being found in every population of whales around the world, it's also conserved across generations. We found that in Southeast Alaska, whales from the 1970s, when the population was quite small, were producing this sound. And then whales today are producing this sound. And there's as many as 3 or 4 different generations of whales from then to now.
But the chickadee that lands on my balcony gives the same song chickadees did 30 or 40 years ago.
Exactly. The difference is that chickadees can't necessarily create new song as they go, but humpback whales create new songs every year. So song is, this is a little bit anthropomorphic, but only a little. Song is creative. Humpback whale song changes every year. And humpback whale song is culturally transmitted. It's learned. And so whales will learn it from one another. And there's some really quite brilliant research done by Ellen Garland at the University of St. Andrews, where she's demonstrated how humpback whale song is culturally transmitted around the southern hemisphere from one population to another to another. So again, for an animal that is constantly reinventing its vocal repertoire, why keep making the same sound over and over and over? And one of the ways that we investigated this was by going out and observing the whales counter-calling, calling back and forth to one another.
Is this the whoop? Is this what you call the whoop call?
Yeah, this is the whoop call. And then experimentally doing playbacks to humpback whales, where we would then go down and play the sound of a humpback whale and see whether or not other whales would also respond with that same sound.
So you recorded the whoop calls and then you played them back.
Yes.
These are underwater speakers, waterproof speakers you lower into the water.
Yeah. And we would, sort of call out into the ocean and say, and then we would wait to see if an animal would call back. And half the time, we would go out and we would play nothing to the ocean. We'd play the sound of running water, so just shh. And 100% of the time that we played a whoop call to a whale, the whales called back.
Wow, 100% of the time.
100% of the time.
So they were responding to what you were broadcasting, so to speak.
They did, yeah. Yeah, but when we played the sound of running water, sometimes we'd hear more calls, sometimes we'd hear less. It was completely random. The response wasn't at all linked to the sound of our running water. And then, because we're good scientists, we also played a positive control. So we would go out and play the sound of an octave sweep. So, and then we would play music, because maybe the whales were just responding to sound. So we played a little Bob Marley to the whales.
Every little thing gonna be all right.
We didn't get any response to the Bob Marley either.
They have no taste in music then, obviously.
Clearly. Or perhaps it was the wrong hemisphere. If I had played it at tropical latitudes, they might have been more interested.
But do you have a pretty firm conclusion, based on computer analysis and all that, about what do these whoops mean?
Yeah, so I feel quite confident that this is a contact call, that whales will use this sound to announce their presence in an area.
I am here.
I am here. I am here. I am. And then the work that I'm doing now, and this is part of what I was doing in Alaska last week, is trying to identify whether or not they have unique voices. Because if a whale enters into a space and says, I am here, or I am, and another whale recognizes that voice, then perhaps they would join together and go and forage. But if a whale enters into a space and says, I am here, and the other whale doesn't recognize that voice, or perhaps doesn't have a long social history with that animal, then they might not get together and go forage together. And so this whoop call is a contact call in that it allows animals to be aware of one another's presence, but it also quite likely facilitates these long-term social bonds that we see among humpback whales.
And what are those long-term social bonds?
It's really cool. So humpback whales don't form pods the way that you think of like killer whales or dolphins. You generally will find a handful of humpback whales swimming alone, and they forage in the same area and then they go their separate ways. But they're not staying with their mothers. They're not staying in family groups. They're definitely not asocial. They interact with one another a lot. They just don't form these really, really stable social bonds like we think of with, swans, for example. So when you watch humpback whales, you're often watching like one whale over here to the right and one whale over there to the left, and then another whale about 2 kilometers in front of you and another whale about, 2 or 3 kilometers behind you. And then there might be a pair of whales that come in and then they split up and then 3 of them come together and then they all go their separate ways. But we also know that there are groups of whales in Southeast Alaska that will get together every year to engage in certain types of foraging behavior. And it's the same individuals that form these core groups.
Oh.
And they're not related. Sometimes they'll come together for short periods of time, just a couple days, and then they disperse again. But these bonds will last for decades.
So they're using the whoop calls to signal each other that they're here and they can work together to get food and that sort of thing?
I think that they are using the whoop calls to let other whales know that they are there. And then the information they get from those calls determines whether or not they then move on to the next stage of social engagement. Because plenty of whales wouldn't need to socially engage. Plenty of whales will continue foraging by themselves, and that would be the right choice for them. Or maybe the ecological conditions wouldn't be right for getting together. But they can't make the decision until they know which individuals are there.
But then that also raises the question, are they saying, I am here, so stay away? Or I am here and, I welcome you to come join me and hang out for a while?
I think it is both of those things. And this is where it also gets a little bit tricky. We want animals to communicate like people.
Right.
And they don't. And so it's frustrating for us when a single sound serves multiple functions. But that's absolutely the case in the animal kingdom. And with whales, this whoop call is a way of giving information. When a whale comes into an acoustic space and announces its presence, the other individuals there then get to make a decision about what they do next. So if I come into a space and say, I am, and over the past 15 years, you and I have gotten together every year to feed on herring, and you recognize me by the sound of my voice. Then you might say, oh, I know that whale. I'm going to get together, and then we would join together and we might cooperatively feed on this school of herring. And in that context, the whoop call would be a call that would bring whales together.
And is there some sort of data that you can point to that makes you feel this hypothesis is sound?
There is, and I'm still working on that part. So these are the projects we're actively working on now. What I know is true is that if you play a whoop call to a whale, it will whoop back to you. So there's counter calling that occurs. I also know, based on research that will come out soon, we're still crunching the numbers on this, but that there is individual variation in these whoop calls. So they're all a little bit different, in the same way that if I record your voice saying hello and my voice saying hello and my sister's voice saying hello, my best friend's voice, my husband's voice, it's all saying hello, but you can tell us apart by the sound of their voices. Well, if I deconstruct all these different whoops from all these different whales that I've been recording, I can find those same differences, that there are certain signatures in the way that their voices sound that make them recognizable.
And do you do that with a computer looking at the graphs, or do you actually hear the differences yourself?
Both. So I take all these recordings. I know where I was when I recorded them. I randomize them. And then I have myself and other people listen to them and put them into groups. Like, okay, I think all of these are the same whale. I think all of these are a different whale. And then we match that up with what we know is true. Are they in fact the same whale, or are they in fact a different whale? And see how much agreement we get just doing it by ear. But then I do the opposite. Then I go and I can actually translate calls into a series of numbers. So what pitch is it? How long is it? What's the loudest part of the call? I can extract all these acoustic features, based on what I know about the physics of sound. And then I can use machine learning methods, or I can use frequentist statistics. I can do discriminant function analysis or classifications and regression trees.
Whatever those mean.
Yeah, you're beyond me.
Yeah. I can use these sort of quantitative mathy methods to get to what I hope is going to be the same answer that I got to with my eye and my ear. And what we found is that this is really successful, that it works really well.
So you can tell the difference between Dave's whoop, my whoop, and Michelle's whoop.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like a breakthrough, isn't it?
Yeah. We still need to finish doing the math and write up the paper, but that's exactly what we think is happening. So at this point, I'll call it a very, very, very strong hypothesis, but I have an enormous amount of confidence in it.
Just to remind everyone, we're talking with Michelle Fournet, who is a specialist on researching the sounds that whales make. She's at the University of New Hampshire, heading an agency whose acronym is a wonderful one, BABBLE.
Babble, I love it. So Michelle, you said earlier that humpback whales basically make two kinds of calls, and so far we've been talking about one of them, their contact calls. So what have you been finding out about the other kind, which I know you've found is connected with feeding?
Oh, yeah. That one is such a lovely call and so much easier to describe. Humpback whales in the North Pacific, to our knowledge, are the only whales that produce those. So in really strong contrast to whoop calls, which are everywhere, they're ubiquitous. Feeding calls are specialized. And this call, it's very operatic. It sounds like humpback whale feeding calls fall in this very narrow pitch. For any acousticians that might be listening, it's about a 500 hertz call. And if you made them any higher, or you made them too much lower, the fish that they're feeding on wouldn't be able to hear them. They use this sound when they're feeding on Pacific herring, and Pacific herring have a very, very narrow range of hearing.
Well, why would you want the herring to know you're there? It seemed like the herring would run away or swim away.
That's exactly what they do. They immediately exhibit a flee and clump response. Baitfish, when they feel intimidated, ball up really, really tightly.
Oh.
And so what the humpback whales do is they use this sound in concert with the blowing of bubbles. So they blow a bubble ring around a school of herring, and the herring are intimidated by the bubbles, so they group up inside of it. The whales go under the bubbles and begin to make this sound, which forces the herring up towards the surface of the water. And now, of course, they cannot swim in air. So now all of the fish are concentrated right at the surface of the water, and the whales can then lunge through them, and they can devour large amounts of fish all at once.
Now I feel sorry for the herring, but I'm amazed by the whales. That's so clever.
This is really sophisticated, isn't it?
Yeah, they are really, really clever. This call is very closely coupled with that behavior. That's called bubble net feeding. And then there's a whole suite of other sounds that get produced along the way, and we have no idea what those mean.
Well, lots of research to be done.
But before we go on, I'd love it if you would describe a humpback whale. I mean, we've all seen, photographs of them and the tails going up and disappearing. Introduce us to a humpback whale for a moment.
Sure. We say that humpback whales are a medium-sized baleen whale, which is relative. Humpback whales are anywhere from 35 to 48 feet long. So, the size of a small school bus. These animals will migrate thousands of miles every year from high-latitude foraging grounds where they eat down to these low-latitude breeding grounds where they give birth. And they forage, they eat and eat and eat because starting on migration, they begin a fast. They stop eating. And they fast along migration, and they get to the tropics, and they fast, and males will sing and advertise, and then they'll breed, and then everybody will then return back to their high latitude foraging grounds to eat again before going back down to the tropics to give birth.
Why do they fast?
Well, mostly because there's not a lot to eat in the tropics. There's not really enough food there that would make it energetically worthwhile for a whale to spend its time to trying to capture it. It would burn more energy than they would consume.
So they really have to stock up in the north before they go.
They do really have to stock up on the north.
Actually, I read something about humpback whales having a crisis in recent years.
Yeah. Humpback whales are well known for being really resilient. Their populations are growing. We were talking about what a great success it was in humpback whales that no longer endangered. But between 2015 and 2018, we saw a massive population crash in a population of whales in the North Pacific that had just been taken off the endangered species list.
Does anybody know why?
Yes. Well, there's some really strong correlations. I should be careful. There was a marine heat wave between 2015 and 2018. So I think it actually started earlier than that, but it impacted the food supply. And so as biologists throughout the North Pacific were watching humpback whales from 2015, 16, 17, and 18, the number of calves dropped, and then whales started showing up emaciated. And it appears that many of those whales starved.
Wow. So this could be the result of climate change.
Yes. Yes.
Well, Michelle, this gets us into some important environmental questions, which also have to do with sound. You've written and talked about this, and other researchers have, that with so many ships, so many boats, making a lot of noise in the sea, that has a real impact on whales' ability to vocalize and communicate, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Anytime we put a boat in the water, it's going to change the ability of that ecosystem to fully function. Imagine if you were going about your day, let's say you've just sat down in your living room and you're going to read a chapter of your favorite book, and then all of a sudden the power goes out and you can't see anything. Now you're clambering, you're trying to find your cup of tea, you're trying to find your book, you can no longer get the information that you needed, you're completely blind. That is the equivalent of what happens to a whale every time a ship passes by. Its ability to interpret the world is shut off because it interprets the world through sound. And as noise grows, the whales can no longer hear each other. They can no longer interpret their environment. They can no longer hear their prey. Or if they can hear, the space over which they can hear shrinks and gets smaller and smaller. And we are putting a lot of boats into the ocean, and we are overlapping frequently with really important habitat for not just humpback whales, but right whales, seals, harbor seals, bearded seals, and fish that really rely on sound. So the ocean experiences this really dramatic shutting off of the lights over and over and over again every single day. But beyond that, chronic noise begets chronic stress. I mean, if you imagine what your life might be like if every morning somebody stood in your bedroom with an air horn, and that was how your day began. Or in the case of things like air guns, for oil and gas exploration, imagine if somebody followed you around all day with an air horn and every 6 to 10 seconds blew it in your ear. It might not physically harm you, but it certainly would disrupt your ability to go about your daily business.
So are scientists like you putting any pressure on boat manufacturers, ship manufacturers, in the same way that people did many years ago with airplane manufacturers, to say you've got to invent some method of propulsion that's not as noisy? I mean, planes are much quieter now than they were 20, 30 years ago.
That's not the role of science. It's really difficult as a scientist to also be a strong political advocate, because it has the potential to bias the work. And we have a real obligation to remaining neutral in answering the questions that we ask, which can be hard, right? Because what it means is that the people who have the most expertise in something often can't be the voice that's advocating for or against something. So that's hard.
Well, that's the way we are. We're journalists. We turn facts into the sunlight and depend on other people to act on them. But on the sound issue, I don't think most people even consider that possibility, that the sounds in the ocean are stressing out the sea creatures, whales and others. Now, during COVID, I mean, you work in Southeast Alaska, in Glacier Bay, inside Passage, right? In that area. Mm-hmm. There are lots of cruise ships there often. But during COVID, that all shut down. What did you see during that period?
This is such a cool thing.
The one good result of COVID we're about to hear.
Yeah. So what happened in Southeast Alaska is that when the cruise ships left, the ocean got quiet. I mean, I know that sounds like a really simple result, but as you might expect, there was this long period of protracted quiet that the ocean got to experience. And there's some great research that's coming out on changes in sound levels and how maybe that impacts the stress of the whales. Similar work was done in right whales after 9/11, where, the whole eastern seaboard shut down for just a couple days. And there happened to be researchers that were out there that were doing research on right whales at the time, looking specifically at right whale stress. And so they had the years leading up to 9/11 and then 9/11 and then the years following it. And what they found was that when the eastern seaboard went quiet, stress in right whales instantly dropped. This really sharp decline.
And just to clarify, you're talking about right whales now, not humpbacks.
Yeah.
And I've read that right whales are almost extinct. I saw when I was preparing for this that the federal government says there are, only a few hundred left in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
Now, how do you measure stress in a whale?
Well, there's a few ways to do it, but for the right whale study, they measured it with poop. They were doing fecal stress studies. They had dogs on boats, and they were sniffing for feces, and then they go and collect it, and then they run hormonal assays on the feces. But now you can do it with biopsy sampling. So little tiny bits of blubber can be taken from the whale, or there's a great group out of Gloucester, Massachusetts that runs Snotbot, where they take a drone and fly it over a whale and they collect blow in a petri dish. So there's lots of different ways of doing it now.
Oh my gosh.
One of the things that strikes me is that when you do this kind of research and you're going to the Arctic, other places like that, I mean, I've read, maybe you said this, that the water is so cold sometimes when you're doing your research. If you fell overboard, you could die.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit, because it sounds very romantic in a way to be out, in the wild, but it's dangerous.
Yeah. I think the danger is part of what makes people think that it is romantic. When things are easy, folks are less drawn to them. The work that we do is very dangerous. We're in, and I'm so fortunate to work with the most extraordinary team. I have breathtakingly brilliant, kind, competent, strong colleagues. My colleagues are the reason that I can do anything at all. One colleague, her name is Dr. Leanna Matthews. She and I did our PhDs together, and she is one of my favorite long-term field companions. And she will just kill me for saying this to anybody that's recording, but she's also a record-breaking weightlifter.
Yikes.
And there is nothing that you want more on your field team than a strong, brilliant woman. She has saved my life on more than one occasion. Literally saved my life. We had an engine that blew up in the middle of Frederick Sound, and we were in a 14-foot Zodiac.
Inflatable.
We're in an inflatable boat with no engine.
So this was an outboard motor that it literally blew up?
It smoked, it sputtered, it died, and we were afloat in the Inside Passage in Alaska. And yes, the water is cold enough that you get about 15 or 20 minutes before hypothermia really sets in, and then you can no longer function, and you'll die very quickly. That water will kill you very, very fast.
You ever think of putting a small auxiliary outboard on the boat that could very, very, very slowly get you to shore?
Yes. Contrary to popular belief, there's not a lot of money in whale research. And a lot of this was done on a real shoestring budget, and we didn't have any additional funds for anything.
What a surprise.
So yikes, there you were drifting with no power. What'd you do?
We have safety things in order. We have SOSs that we can call, and we had a whole safety plan. But this area is remote enough that we are several hours away from the nearest town by fast boat. And so when our engine died, we got on our emergency devices. We called our safety officer. He immediately, mobilized, but there was bad weather coming in, and it is not easy to paddle a boat that size into shore. And what it requires is somebody leaning over the front of the boat and single-handedly sort of side to side paddling. And Leanna paddled us back. At first we were taking turns. It was like she and I and our intern. We had a student with us. And then eventually she was just like, guys, Every time I have to give this paddle up to somebody else, we move backwards. Just sit back.
Michelle, when we started this interview, and I hope you don't mind my sharing this with our listeners, I did an introduction where I said something like, and our guest is going to explain how she's learning how to talk with whales, and she'll tell us what they say to her. And you got really miffed. In fact, you said if I was going to describe your work like that, you'd stop the interview.
Yeah.
So we started the recording over again with a much more careful introduction. And my question is, what is it about that original intro that upset you? You know, I was basically saying, hey, you're learning how to talk with whales.
Yes, I get asked that question a lot. I'm really fighting against my Dr. Dolittle reputation right now.
What bugs you when journalists ask that?
My goal has never been to talk to a whale. It's not my goal. I don't want to have a conversation with a whale. It's dangerous.
Why dangerous?
It implies that we would like to disrupt the natural order of humpback whale communication, society, culture, and insert ourselves into that society. But we do so without having even the most basic understanding about how humpback whales interpret the world. It's extremely egotistical to think the whole purpose of this research should be so that I can talk to a whale. Why would a whale have any interest in talking to us? We haven't earned the right to ask the whales our questions. We have systematically decimated their populations. We have killed their offspring. We've changed their migration patterns. We have altered the ecosystems that they live in. And now that we have technology available to us, we think that we're just going to go drop a microphone in the water and have an interview?
I'm trying to figure out, is your response right now, is this an emotional response, a scientific response, an ecological response?
It's all of those things. And I've had people suggest to me before, why don't we bring a playback speaker and play a new sound and see if we can change how whales sing? We should go to Hawaii and let's play a sound and see if we can get the whales to adopt it. We know very little about what song is actually for. So we don't know what the ramifications might be of inserting a new unit. It could have no ramifications or it could have huge ramifications. But at the end of the day, the scientific validity of doing that would be so that we could say, we made whales say a sound that we thought was cool. But it wouldn't necessarily benefit the animal. And so my question is always, as a biologist, always, how does this benefit my study species? And how does it benefit the human users who rely on that ecosystem? And so anything that we don't yet understand comes with unnecessary risks, and the rewards are just that it would make us feel good. And I would hope that more people would get an experience where we are capable of having absolute reverence for something just because it is, instead of feeling this really strong need to include ourselves in the equation, to say the whale is only relevant if it interacts with me. The whale is relevant whether it interacts with you or not, but that's a big shift in how we think about whales.
That's a beautiful answer, and it leads me to invite you to comment on a piece of great literature, Moby Dick. Mm-hmm. Which, of course, does involve intense interaction between humans and a particular whale.
I think that book is extraordinary. Whaling so deeply changed the course of human history that I feel like it deserves its own unit in every high school classroom. But then I also think when you think about Ahab and his monomania, his obsession with the white whale, he is a piece of all of us. He is a piece of us wanting to take something bigger than we are and to keep it. Whales have, for time immemorial, have been something that humans have consumed. We've eaten them. We've built things with their bodies. We have fueled industrial revolutions. During World War II, they used to take the blubber of whales and pour it into the boots of soldiers, and that would keep their feet from getting cold or keep their feet from getting wet. We turned whale oil into margarine to feed families when soldiers were off at war and they couldn't milk the cows to make butter. We have entire civilizations that are based around the bodies of whales. Jonah in the whale, the Herazoica in churches. I mean, all over the place, this really, really, really strong consumption of whales, their physical bodies. And now we live in an era where we are no longer actively consuming whales' bodies, but we are consuming their images. We're taking selfies with whales. We are wanting the whales to talk to us. We have redirected whales as a status symbol, as an icon, and now we want to be in the frame with the whale. And that is yet another form of consumption. There are more photographs of right whales on the internet than right whales have ever existed in evolutionary time. That species is going to go extinct. We are documenting its extinction, but our emotional attachment to that extinction is removed because they are so accessible. And I worry about this for lots of endangered species. So a lot of my work, a lot of the communication I do is about recentering, taking ourselves out of the picture and considering things from the perspective of the animal.
You've been so poetic and moving in the last few minutes that I'm tempted to say thanks. Except, I think all that begs the question, why do you and fellow researchers, why do you spend so much time studying what whales are saying or why they're making sounds? And you've talked about wanting to help the species. How does that research help in the long run?
If we don't know what they're saying, then no one can make a case for protecting it. We have to understand what the function of these sounds are so that we can conserve it. And we have to have an understanding as to what sounds they even make. Until fairly recently, we didn't even know that humpback whales at high latitudes were making sounds at all. Similarly, they used to think that female humpback whales were mute. So having an understanding as to the ecology, why they say what they say, the function of these calls, allows us to come up with a strategy and a plan for ensuring that their ability to communicate perpetuates. Without evidence, it is hard to make a case for protection. And my job is to collect the evidence. And I care because I love these animals. And when you care about something, there is a desire to understand it more fully. And that in and of itself is a form of reverence.
Michelle Fournet runs the Marine Bioacoustics and Behavior Lab at the University of New Hampshire, otherwise known as Sea Babel.
Michelle, thank you very much. This was absolutely fascinating and moving, and it was a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
And that's it for this episode of Two Reporters.
You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or pretty much any leading podcast site. And we hope you'll check out more of our work at tworeporters.org. I'm David Tripler.
And I'm Daniel Zwerdling. Please join us again soon for another episode of Two Reporters. Bye-bye.